So I'm Shira, and I'm presenting on the educational experiences of American families during the time of COVID. As Anna alluded to or said before, this is work that I've done in collaboration with my fantastic colleagues, Dan Silver, Anna Saavedra, Morgan Polikoff, Amy Rappaport, and Marcia Garland. All right, so the education sample relies on a subset of the total UAS data, and our sample consists of approximately 1,400 households with at least one pre-K to 12th grade child in the 2019 to 2020 or the 2020 to 2021 school year. We rely on 5 waves of survey administration data spanning from April 1st to the present. And as you can see from the news clippings, we're able to track parents' experiences over a lot of activity in education. So starting from when the schools begin to close in April to eventually almost all schools closing by the end of that school year, to planning for the next year over the summer, and to the present, where you have kind of some people attending remotely, some people attending in person, some people doing a hybrid model, and throughout all that time, we're able to track parents' experiences. So at the beginning of the pandemic, back in April, we found large disparities in educational experiences, and I'm going to show you a couple. In April 2020, we found that more than 1/3 of low-income families lacked access to computer access and internet. So only about 2/3 of low-income households, and we define that as income less than $25,000 a year, had computers and internet access available for children's remote learning, compared to 91% of families with who earned $75,000 to $149,000, and 98% of families who earned above $150,000. Also in April, we found some disparities in the educational activities that children were completing. So while most parents reported that their children were receiving schoolwork, we found lower proportions were interacting with teachers online or receiving feedback with stark differences by income. Specifically, 89% of the highest income households reported having at least one interaction with the teacher, compared to 57% in the lowest income households. Similarly, 72% of children in the highest income households reported having feedback from teachers, compared to 57% in lowest income households. We also see back in April that the rates of students receiving critical services like free and reduced price meals and special education services dropped dramatically under school closures. So in February 2020, prior to the COVID-19 related school closings, parents reported that roughly 40% of responding parents in our sample reported that students were receiving free or reduced price meals at school. And in April, just over half of those who had been receiving meals when schools were open continued to receive meal services after closures. Similarly, 16% of our sample reported that their student had been receiving services or accommodations through an individualized education plan or IEP or a 504 plan in February 2020. And by April, only 61% of those students who had been receiving services continued to receive those special education services. So next, I'm going to report on what's happening currently, the October wave. And in our most recent data, we do see that while we still have a long way to go, things seem to be getting a little bit better, mostly driven actually by the fact that some students are back in school. Before I get into these results, I just want to make a note that these data are extremely preliminary. So while I wanted to present the latest available data for this conference, the latest wave just closed yesterday, and so we're thus finalizing the results and working to understand the underlying trends. So take the next couple of slides as preliminary. That being said, when we return to this question of the services that students are receiving, we do see some improvements still since April. So recall that 40% of our sample had been receiving free and reduced price lunch services in February. This dropped to 21%, roughly half of that in April, and then rebounded slightly to about 30% in October. So it's getting better, although ideally we'd like to see it back at the levels that it had been in April. For special education services, about 16% of our sample had been receiving services in February. This dropped to 7% in April, and it only rebounded to 8% in October. I'll also point out the trend for students receiving gifted and talented services, since that continues to drop. So 13% of students were receiving GATE services in February, which dropped to 7% in April, and then dropped further to 5% in October. We're also seeing some other interesting trends in our data that I'll just call out. So first of all, we're seeing that that technology use seems to be a bit better. So in October, only 4% of respondents reported having no computer or device for children to participate in distance learning, and only 3% reported not having internet for distance learning. We also asked parents about a number of policy proposals and whether they supported those. And so support for requiring students to wear face coverings all day in school increased from 45% over the summer to 69% in October. That's a huge jump. And similarly, we saw changes in parent support for canceling standardized tests. So back in the spring, we asked parents about that, and they 43% agreed with it. That jumped to 60% over the summer and 63% in October. So I'll also make a note that this is part of an ongoing research agenda. So in addition to the work here, we also are tracking educational experiences and supports for learning, parents' experiences and concerns about education during the pandemic, parents' experiences talking to their children about racism, parent support for policy proposals, including school reopenings and mask wearing, and impacts on higher education. We're also able to link these variables across the UAS data set to examine differences by race, parental education, income, political party, urbanicity, health data, and anything else that you can think of that you hear at this conference. So there's a lot of possibilities here, and please stay tuned for future work as we continue to explore these rich relationships. Thanks very much for your attention.